guys. Welcome to our study of Revelation. If you got my email, you know that we are beginning in Revelation chapter 5 with a look at the Lamb and the scroll. The first books of Revelation begin with a look at John being invited into this vision, and then there's many reflections of Jesus and speaking to the churches. So we're gonna go back there starting next week and look at his messages to the churches and how that applies to us. One thing we can know is that after this portion, this first part of Revelation, the church is not mentioned again. Until Revelation 19, we see an allusion to the bride of Christ, a picture and angels saying, "Come, let me show you the bride of Christ, the wife of the Lamb." And then, of course, in Revelation 21. So we're going to begin with the churches, and then the vision goes over to what's going to happen with Israel. And during this time of tribulation, there's also a blessing promised for those who are willing to look into this book and to read it and to listen to it. And so we're looking forward to that blessing. But we're going to go ahead today and get in with Revelation. I'm going to read verses 3 and 4 right now. I really strongly encourage you to read all of Revelation 5 on your own. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and read these verses. It says, "And no one in heaven or on earth or under the earth was able to open the scroll or to look into it. And I began to weep loudly because no one was found worthy to open the scroll or to look into it. And one of the elders said to me, 'Weep no more. Behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Root of David, has conquered, so that he can open the scroll and its 7 seals.'" So what had happened is John was seeing this vision, and he's in the throne room of God, and he sees this scroll with these that's written on the front and on the back, and it's sealed with these 7 seals. And he begins to weep because he knows that the fate of the world is in those 7 seals. He also knows who's holding it, which is God himself on the throne. And so that's kind of the image we're talking about. And he was weeping because there was no one to open, no one found worthy to open those scrolls. And so that's the image where we're at right now. So I want to begin with just kind of an illustration, thinking about if you've read books, you've read fiction books, and you've read where, you open the book and you get into the story of these characters and their lives, and there's the background, and there's all these things going on. Well, picture that in your book, there is this moment where the characters in the story decide, you know what? We don't want to be a part of this story anymore. We want to leave the story and go find our own story. We do not agree with this story and how it's going. And so the characters leave the story which they are written in, they are part of the author's creation, but they decide to leave the author's creation and go try and find the other story. Well, that seems ridiculous because we know that characters outside of story don't make sense, that they are written into a story by an author, and if you take them out of that, there's no significance. They don't even make sense. No one even knows who they are. But that's exactly what we did, because God was writing our story. We're characters in his story, but he is our maker. He is our creator, and he even wrote himself into the story. He would walk with Adam and Eve in the garden, and he knew them. They intimately knew him, and he knew them. And so that's kind of what happened in the beginning. And as we left the story that God was telling for us, and in the very beginning and even now, there's 2 things that happen, and these happen in each of our hearts. These are part of our hearts that help us recognize our need to get back into the story originally written for us. First thing is that books have a cover. We recognize we don't have a covering, and we know that this was the first thing that Adam and woman at that time, she gets her name later after the fall, after the curses are given, but they recognize, oh my goodness, we're naked, and they try and hide, and that's the state they're in when God finds them. And they also recognize that we don't make sense to ourselves outside of God's story. And there's all kinds of explanations and all these ways that we try to make sense of things, to give ourselves some feeling of, okay, yeah, this is it. I can accept this, but not this. But there's no rest in it. There's no rest in it. It's always changing, always never, it's not true. So it's never able to fully rest in that. And it's a sad story. And so the best you can do is have a life assigned to the futility of always seeking a covering. A life always seeking to make sense and to make truth out of something that isn't true. So the best you can hope for is to live a life of a pseudo story. Not living in the middle of Christ, who is your originator and your creator, and living his life for you and not living his intended purpose for you is frustrating. So that what you can hope for are ever increasing fleeting moments of fleshly pleasure, or some sense of accomplishment, and seeing yourself try and build an earthly covering and saying, I'm building this and this is going to last, and other people it's going to last for. But we know we know the truth that it never does last, and it's continually frustrating trying to keep it up, something that's always breaking down. It's like, as King Solomon said, it's chasing the wind. There's a rest that comes when you say, you know what, I'm not saying that life as a Christian is easy, because it's not, but there's a rest knowing that this is where I belong. I'm part of his story. And even if the whole world is crumbling beneath me, I have a place to stand that's solid, and a purpose to be in that is going somewhere, that's not going to be frustrated, that's never going to be taken apart or fall down. There's a sense of knowing that we're home and that we're finally where we belong. To not live in this story is almost like an airplane. You stay high above and you're constantly circling a destination that you're never going to land at, but you continually plan, and in the planning you kid yourself to feel secure that you're going to get there one day, but you know in your heart you're never going to arrive. But oneness with God is our only true destination to find life, to find love, to find fullness of existence. And Jesus is the only runway he's provided for us. Jesus is the only God who has come from heaven for us and said, you can't do anything to get to me. There's nothing you can give me to earn my approval of you, but I love you and I'm coming for you. And if you just agree to be mine, I'll give you rest in my name. And that's exactly what Jesus is. And no other God says that. They're always, you have to earn, constantly strive. Even if your God is yourself, because you're striving in yourself, trying to make yourself continually happy, or frustrated with people because they're not making you happy. But Jesus is the only one that came for us, and all we do is receive him and let him love us. When we exit that plane, when we've landed in him, Acts 17, it says that in him we live, move, and breathe, and have our being, and we just exist in him. And so our expectation of life comes from him, and that changes the whole perspective and the whole way we see our lives and our way of living. We get to live a story in his covering. We don't have to constantly try and provide our own. So when he decided to let us back into his story, which was already the plan from the very beginning, but when he was actually coming to introduce, when the creator of our stories came back into the world to introduce himself to us, when the author came into the story that he was writing, he came as a lamb. He came as a lamb. He came as, like we are, we're lambs. He came as one of us. So I want to talk to you about how this happened, and who it was that made it happen. So when we think about Jesus and we think about him actually coming to the earth, there is, in essence, if you could picture a ball, And there's the beginning and there's an ending, and there's an Alpha and the Omega. So there's a creation that he has made, and within that creation and this atmosphere called time, God exists outside of all of that. So he exists outside of his creation. It's the author existing outside of the story he's writing. And so if you could picture like a book, represents time. This is the creation, but outside of all this space is his atmosphere, and that atmosphere is eternity. And so what God decided to do is because he made us and he made us in his image, he made us outside of this, outside of the ball that he was creating. He put his creation made in his image inside of something that was created called time. Have you ever thought about that? That we are eternal beings, but yet we exist in a creation that is temporary. We are made in his image. We are not God, but we're made in his image. We're eternal beings placed inside of this thing he created called time. And we cannot exist and we don't make sense. This is another reason why we don't make sense to ourselves without him, because we were made from him and for him. And so if you take us out part of him, we're trying to understand how to make ourselves exist, eternal beings exist in a created state that we can't relate to. There's always going to be a part of us that's always seeking, because we're eternal beings and we're made to be connected to our creator who is eternal. I don't know if that's kind of a reach, but I hope that makes sense. It's really, really amazing when we think about all the ways of how God's always pointing us to him, always pointing us to him. And so, and I used that because I wanted to talk about the lamb. Why did Jesus come as a lamb? Well, as far as I know, and I've researched lambs a lot, they are the only animal that cannot exist without a shepherd. In order to survive, they have to have a creature, which is human, outside of who they are created to be, lambs, direct them and lead them to life. Just as we, eternal beings, need a shepherd who exists outside of us to lead us and to guide us to life. We need someone altogether wholly different from us to lead us into a life that is altogether different from the existence that we're now abiding in. And we're utterly dependent on him to lead us in that way. So our story is dependent upon a shepherd. And when we follow him, we are led into the life that he has pre-written for us and in his word. We're able to live out this word because his spirit enables us to be able to walk with him and understand where he's going and walk in paths that we could not do outside of belonging to him. And we have our covering. We have our covering in that lamb, and we have direction in that covering, and we're able to find him. God never mentions. There's two places. There's abiding in him, and if you're not abiding in him, you're abiding in the God of this world, which we know is the evil one. It's a chaotic place, and there's a lot of chaos. A lot of it we're seeing culminate right now. There's light and there's darkness. And although sometimes the light may even appear dim, there's still light. And so there's two distinct things. There's only two places to abide, in darkness or in light. He never gives us another alternative than that. He never says, when there's you in the middle. No, if we're not abiding in him, we're abiding in darkness. And the whole reason he came is to deliver us from that. To pierce through the darkness and to say, I am the light of the world and I'm here, and you have a way back into the light through me. So when Jesus decided to reveal himself to us, it was through a lamb, beginning with the first sacrifice. If we go all the way back to Genesis 3, And we know that death occurred, but yet it wasn't the death of Adam. It was a death of I believe it was a lamb, the animal that God slain to give skins to cover them over for their sin. Thus began the sacrificial system of needing to kill an innocent animal, to project the sin onto that animal, to kill that animal, to cover over the sin. And that's how that all began. Then there was the Passover sacrifice, where the Israelites were instructed to kill a lamb, to put the blood on the doorpost, representing the door of our hearts, that we let Christ speak over, and then to eat the roasted lamb quickly. They roast the lamb and they eat it. And Jesus, he's the bread of life. We're to eat him, his word, and ingest his word, and it gives us life. It gives us freedom. And then there's the one thing I want to say about that is, I forgot to print out the picture, but if you can, go on the internet and look up a picture of these actual roasted Passover lambs, and it'll astound you. You'll see a lamb that has a rod. It's literally pierced from the front to the top. And then there's a rod that's holding its arms out together so that they can roast it. And it's literally the cross. It's a lamb hung out on a cross. And so I thought that was just so profound, that when that Passover time was coming, Jesus was literally like a lamb hung over the flame of our affliction, while the Israelites during his crucifixion were eating lambs, literally roasted over a flame. And it just astounds me how real God's word is. From the very beginning, God was just showing us that he was coming to be our covering for us. And he did this by choosing a people to reveal himself to and through, which are the Jews, the Israelites, to show them that as much as they wanted to come back into his story for them, they're unable to, because it's unachievable for us to do. But God himself could do it. And he sent prophets to announce that he was coming himself to offer a sacrifice of himself and to become our way. And we could see the greatest example of that through Isaiah 53, a literal description of Jesus coming for us to die and take the place of our sin. And then coming to die, and then he came. He actually came and became our way. And then what did he do after he died? 3 days later, he got up and he gave the Great Commission and said, now I'm leaving, I'm putting my spirit within you, and I'm coming back for you. And so when we see that lamb who's able to take the scroll, this is why he was able to take it, because he is the one who came, who fulfilled, and who covered over us, so that he has the right to intercede for us. And because he is our intercessor, he has the right to pour out the judgment. And I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. So our greatest need is for restored identity, is for a restored identity. When I talk about identity, I mean that place where we know who we are. We know who we are, we know where we're going, and we know whose we are. Our identity is in God, who we're made in his image. In his image we are made. And any identity we seek outside of that doesn't give us the rest that only he can provide. Our story that finally makes sense, because we are reconnected to the one who's actually written our story and writing it. And we can find out more about how that he does that in Psalm 139, where it says, every one of your days was before I was ever born was written in your book. So every single day for our lives, he's already recorded in his book. And as we abide in him, we actually walk out the life that he's always intended us to have. And that is awesome when you think about that. And so it's within his story that we find our own. And because our story is in his story, we actually are one with him. We're one with him. So there was a moment over 2,000 years ago when the story that was written for Jesus' life was to come and restore us back to him. And when that happened, that moment when he said, "It is finished," meaning it's done. I've paid the price. I'm the lamb that was roasted for your affliction, for my affliction, for our sin. And yet, when he said it's done, the price is paid for them to enter back into the story with God. That curtain in the temple ripped from top to bottom. And all of a sudden, it's almost like the bookends were open. And he's saying, "Welcome back in. You're able to come and abide in my story for you again. You're free to enter back into your eternal covering." Mark 15:37 says, "And Jesus uttered a loud cry and breathed his last. And the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. And when the centurion who stood facing him saw in this way, he breathed his last and said, 'Truly, this was the Son of God.'" And we know that centurion's story even changed, that he actually received Jesus and he actually became martyred and was crucified for Christ, because his story changed in the moment that he witnessed the death of Jesus. In a moment, God pushed the covering of death and separation from our Father, and the only one in whose image we were made. And we went from being lost seekers of a covering to becoming suddenly a kingdom of priests to our God. We get to rule and reign with him forever and ever and ever. In Revelation, we see the Lamb that was slain become one with us. We see oneness with us. And as we talk about this, I'm going to read, when you read Revelation 5, you'll see that this Lamb is presented with 7 horns and also with 7 eyes. And it says those are the 7 eyes of the spirit of the 7 spirits of the churches. Us being the church, and those are the spirits of the church. And so there's 7 horns, which in the Bible, horns represent a kingdom or power, authority, and 7 is perfect. So when you think about a kingdom or a power or authority, 7 is perfect. So it's a perfect kingdom, perfect power, perfect authority. The 7 eyes is perfect vision. And he says in Revelation 5 that those eyes represent the 7 spirits of the churches. So God right now can see us perfectly. Perfect vision. He can see his church. His spirit is watching over us with perfect vision. I'm going to read Revelation 5 verses 8 through 10. Beginning in verse 8, it says, "And when he had taken it," talking about the scroll, "the 24 elders fell down before the Lamb. Each one had a harp, and they were holding golden bowls full of incense, which are the prayers of the saints." That's pretty cool. "And they sang a new song. 'You are worthy to take the scroll, to open its seals, because you were slain, and with your blood you purchased men for God, from every tribe and language and people and nation, and you have made them to be a kingdom of priests to serve our God.'" That's talking about us, made us to be a kingdom of priests to serve our God. "And they will reign on the earth," and we will reign on the earth. That's us. We will reign on the earth, and we're a kingdom of priests. And what is a priest? What does that actually mean? Well, a priest, according to my research, is a mediator. It represents divine being of his subjects, and in return from them to God. So a priest is a representative of the divine being, and he's not only translating who God is to the people, but also translating who the people are to God. So it's an ambassador, one through whom God represents himself. It's like God saying, "I'm in heaven, I'm at the judgment seat, but I'm sending you with my authority to represent who I am to the world." And that's exactly what he's called us to be. That's a pretty awesome responsibility, isn't it? So when we see the Lamb, we can't help but see ourselves, knowing that he sees us. So he is our representative, and we are his representatives. He's our representative in heaven, and we're his representatives here on earth. We're one with him. And I put in my notes, really, we really are one with him. And you know what? He really is one with you. You may not feel like it. You may look at yourself and not think you look like it, but you truly are one with him. He is the one who rescued us from all of our stories outside of him. Every story we ever tried to live, all those doors knocking on people or circumstances or situations, he paid for all of it. And because of that, because he is our Savior, he is our representative in heaven. And he delivered us. He came for us. And the Creator entering his own creation to become one with his creation. And because he did that, he's the only one worthy to open the scroll. Heaven is holy. We talked about this last week. And we're not holy. Yet by him we are holy. Because our covering is holy. We are holy. We're redeemed in him. And you know why? And it wasn't because all of a sudden someone said it. Like we hear people say now, we say this, so this is true. No, God didn't just say it. He literally paid the price for our holiness. When we get to heaven, we'll literally see the scars in his body. He will be the only one in heaven with an imperfect body, with the body pierced. And every time we see those scars will be the only reminder in heaven that ever point to that we were ever chose to be apart from him. And who bore it? We didn't bear it. We didn't bear the consequences for our choice to separate from him. He bore it. He bore it, and it's real to him, and it should be real to us. Only the Lamb climbed out of holiness and opened a way through holiness, through his own body, to let us back in. He did that for us, and that's why he's the only one worthy to open the scroll. And that's why he appeared as a lamb slain before the foundation of the world. And this is why John was weeping loudly. I was like, Lord, why is John weeping when he knows what's going to happen when Jesus opens those scrolls? Is it good news for us? Well, yes and no. It's actually bad news for the inhabitants of earth, because those scrolls represent the judgments of when men separated from God. There's judgment outside of holiness. And when those scrolls are opened, that judgment begins for men who have decided, no, we don't want anything to do with God. He's not our God. He's not our Lord, and we don't want him. So why was John weeping? Wouldn't he want people saved from judgment? No, he doesn't, because that judgment, and I don't know for sure, but I'm just imagining that when John was seeing God face to face and in heaven and in the holiness, knowing that this is God. This is God. This is actually who he is, and he's completely, completely, completely holy. And yet his creation doesn't acknowledge him as such. And knowing what's at stake, because if God created something that can completely, completely reject him, then his wrath has to happen. God is holy, but God is also just. He's just and he's holy, completely combined. So we can't just say God is all merciful and all gracious and everyone gets a free pass. Well, no, we can't do that, because that would mean that God is not just, and God is just. He's perfect justice and perfect holiness all together. So those scrolls being opened, in a sense, is saying, yeah, judgment's coming, but God, that's part of God's identity coming. The fullness of his identity will be manifest in this earth. The question is, which side of it will you be on? Will you be on the side where Jesus paid for your justice, or will you want to pay for your own justice? Because separating from God, you're going to stand on your own 2 feet and have to take consequences into your own hands, saying, yeah, I didn't trust you and I don't want you, and now I'm willing to pay the consequence for standing on my own 2 feet apart from you. And so that's what's at stake, and he recognized that. So that wrath must take place so that we will fully understand who God is, because God is holy, and we cannot just receive the parts of him we want to. We're going to receive all of him, whether we like it or not. And so when we picture this lamb, and he's standing there and he's slain, and yet he's holding those judgments in his hands, we're seeing truth right there that's so profound. If you just let your mind think about this, he's holding wrath in his hand. But what else is he? He is the lamb who paid for the wrath. Is that not crazy? It's a crazy, amazing, beautiful to me. He's holding the wrath that's going to be poured out in his hand, while at the same time representing the wrath that already was poured out for those of us who are in him. Is that not amazing? So there's still an element of choice, saying, this is for those who will not receive me, but I'm right here and I paid for your wrath. And so there's the picture of that lamb we see right there. God's perfection and man's sin. The perfection of God's love, literally holding the wrath to carry forth that perfection of his judgment in his hand. There's no one who can intersect that. When I think about that moment and what that is like when those seals began to be opened, and it's terrifying, because as I reread Revelation, it's kind of sobering to realize, oh my goodness, this is happening, and this looks like it's happening soon. And there's still so many people I know that have not received that lamb. But when I think about the wrath of God, that even in wrath, that's his mercy, because he's saying, you are going to recognize me. If you don't recognize me as a lamb, you're going to recognize me as a lion. But even that is a mercy, because he wants us to see and understand who he is. When I think about, for instance, my children, I want my kids to recognize who Jesus is before the lion comes, because I want them to receive his mercy. But at the same time, if they didn't, then I would want whatever it takes for them to be with me in heaven. I want my kids in heaven with me. I want them not just to be their mom here on earth and then say goodbye to them for eternity. I want them in eternity with me. And so in that way, I don't know, I'm not God, but I can imagine how his heart feels that way too. Like, if you won't receive me through my grace and my mercy, I'll do whatever it takes to get you to recognize who I am and receive me. And I know that there will be many, and I truly believe there will be many who come to see him during that time of the Great Tribulation. He knows how to reconcile us to himself, whether through grace, mercy, or even through wrath. So what are we to do during this time? What's our response? To stand in the fullness of who God made us to be. He took our place, and we're to stand in that place he opened up for us and shine for him. Like we said last week, just keep shining. Just keep shining. 2 Corinthians 5, verse 20 through 21 says, therefore we are ambassadors for Christ, God making his appeal through us. We implore you on behalf of Christ to be reconciled to God. Be reconciled to God. We're supposed to be that one that is imploring people to be reconciled to God. For our sake, he made him to be sin who knew no sin, in order that the righteous requirement, in order that we might become the righteousness of God. So Jesus met that righteous requirement so that we could become the righteousness of God. Another scripture, 1 Peter 2:9 says, but you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, just like we read in Revelation 5 that they were worshiping, saying that we became a kingdom of priests to serve our God, and we will reign on the earth, and we are reigning on the earth. But you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for his own possession, that you may proclaim the excellencies of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. So we stand in that marvelous light and we just say, come on home. God is here and he loves you. So God is perfect. He is perfect seeing. He has perfect power. And I wanted to talk about this real quickly, because when we talk about the Lamb, it made me think about the altar. And the altar in the temple, it had 4 horns. We just talked about horns a minute ago, the 7 horns, but there were actually horns on the altar on each 4 corners. And those horns would be where they would tie the sacrifices, the lambs, up to the horns of the altar. And the lamb was actually slaughtered at the altar. And so those horns represent the power of God. They would transfer their sins onto the animal. And so that when that animal died, it was like their sins dying because God was interceding. He was receiving the innocent blood in order. Someone had to die in order, or something had to die in order to pay for and cover over the covering over the sins. They would put the blood of that lamb on the horns of the altar, and that lamb died there. And so what people were, another thing that would happen is, say if you were in trouble with another person and you needed mercy, you could run to the horns of the and grab a hold of the horn of the altar and ask for mercy. And in essence, what that was, what you were saying is that God atoned. If you think I've wronged you, maybe I have, maybe I haven't, but I'm asking for mercy because God's atoned me. He became one with me here on this horn of this altar, and I'm safe here. The horns of the altar represented a safe place because the atonement was recognized there. I'm safe because God himself is standing in for me. And so, we as Christians, as we think about ourselves as ambassadors, we are to be like the horns of that altar, where people in the world can come to us and they can run to us and say, here's a safe place for me. The blood of Christ is right here in this person, and I can talk to them and I can be honest with them. I can be naked and unashamed in their presence because the mercy of Christ is upon this person. And you know what? We as a church have not done a good job at this. We have been, in fact, we've been the opposite, where people, and myself included, at the age of 30, I was terrified to come to church for this very reason. I didn't feel safe in front of church people. I felt like if I come there for mercy, I'm going to receive judgment, when actually it's the exact opposite. And I did receive mercy. And God received me with mercy when I came to church. But I remember that feeling because I had lots of experiences growing up where I did receive judgment instead of mercy. And we have to do a better job at this. If we're going to help people understand who Christ is, we're going to have to be like those altars, walking around and saying and hoping that people can grab hold of God's mercy and his atonement right through our own hearts. So we have to do a better job at that. Remember at all times that God sees, and he sees perfectly. And that doesn't mean you have to be perfect in order to be that. It means that you understand and know the one who is perfect for you. And you're expressing his love and his kindness and mercy and grace and truth to anyone who is willing to come. Each one of us, there are two stories trying to get out all the time. The old one, which the enemy loves to remind us of, and he does a good job reminding me of that all the time. My old, broken, sin-sick self. But there's also a new one, a redeemed self, a self that's been completely redeemed by the blood of the Lamb. One who the new self looks back, and when I look at my old life, I just see the blood of Christ faithfully covering over it. And when I look ahead, I can't see what's going to happen, but I see the blood of Christ fully and faithfully covering over all of it as I step into it literally unknown, just holding the hand of the shepherd who's leading me. But there's two of those. And Jesus is saying that one who sees my blood covering over you, that is who I want you to be. I wrote a poem about this very thing, and this is how I'm going to close our lesson. But it's called Her Here, and it's on my blog if y'all want to find it. My blog is www.perfectmess.org. But I'm going to go ahead and read this and then close out. Forgive me, Father, for blocking you out and then blaming you for all the ways I feel blocked out. Been there? I sure have. Forgive me, Father, for forgetting that you came to be my gate, opening me into the security of your unknown. And there is a security even when we don't know what the next step is, but we know who we're taking it with. So, man, sometimes it's so hard to step into that moment. The security of your unknown and not my prison door that I lock to keep myself safe within my insecure little boxes. Thank you, Father, for knowing how to open prison doors and how to burst through brick walls, even as I blame you for taking away the so-called security that they provide. Thank you for loving me too much to watch me dry up within those walls. Anyone been there like me where we just don't want to leave these man-made walls because we're so afraid to enter into the insecurity of not knowing what's next? I feel like that often, but you know what? We're still going into it regardless. We're going into it, so we might as well go into it willingly with our Christ. Thank you for teaching me that the mystery of you is greater, stronger, and safer than the known of me. Thank you for loving me too much at times and just enough at others. Thank you for showing me what I look like completely undone and helping me to know that I can still stand even then. Because even if I couldn't bear to see myself then, I could see you, and who I am in you is who I am. There's this beautiful moment when you see yourself so undone. And I don't know about you, but I am intensely insecure. I think that's why God made me a teacher, just because I would constantly have to look at his face and his word and find security in who he is. But just growing up without two real good parents in order to lead me and guide me, and as a child growing up in poverty with a single mom and not a dad around, I just felt insecure. And it's a miracle that I could feel secure in Christ. Yet sometimes it still gets the best of me. My insecurity comes in and he has to burst through those walls and remind me, you are mine. You just keep coming towards me. I'm going to keep coming towards you, and I'm never going to let you go. And I need that reminder so often. I can only imagine that you do too. And so who we are in him is who we are. And that is a beautiful reminder when that happens. And I know what you've always known, that I can be her here, that I can be that girl who you see and you know that I don't have any idea how to be. But somehow by your grace, I get to be that girl right here in this broken world. Jesus, we thank you for loving us. We thank you for being the lamb that was slain just to rescue us. We thank you for the mercy that even in wrath of those who don't believe you, you're going to be revealing yourself, the justice of who you are. We thank you for the justice, that you are a just God, that we may not see things turning around like we think they should go right now, but you know exactly what needs to happen, and you have you have perfect vision, and we trust your vision greater than we trust our own. We love you. We praise you. I just pray for everyone watching this video that you just bless them incredibly today, Lord, with awareness, extra measure awareness of your nearness, your love, your closeness. We love you, and we just ask all these things in your name, Jesus. Amen. Thank you for joining me. I'll see you again next week as we get to the rest of Revelation. God bless you.